Who was Mother Teresa? Regarded in her lifetime as a living saint and beatified following her death, even today, Mother Teresa is a name associated with devotion and kindness.
In India, there is a belief that the very sight of a holy person brings a blessing.
During her life, this Albanian nun of diminutive stature held counsel with foreign leaders,
Mother Teresa was busy, as usual, saving the world.
was the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize, and became the face of Catholic missionaries worldwide, symbolized by her home for the dying in Calcutta, India. But was there something darker lurking behind the PR stratagem of her laudation and praise?
This so-called home for the dying, which is her flagship home, is the grimmest place imaginable.
All the patients had shaved heads.
There's a communal toilet that people have to defecate in presence of each other.
They're dying. They're not being given a great deal of medical care. They're not being given painkillers.
They are not allowed visits from their friends or relatives.
I would say it was a certainty that millions of people died because of her work.
It was her obsession with suffering and her obsession that people need to suffer in order to come close to Jesus.
One may say it all began with a documentary. 1969 saw the release of perhaps one of the most influential propaganda documentaries of the 20th century. Produced under the auspices of the BBC, Malcolm Muggeridge, an English author, satirist, and known mountebank, co-directed the documentary Something Beautiful for God. In this film, Muggeridge claimed that he had achieved something unprecedented, to have captured the first miracle on film. Traveling to Calcutta, Muggeridge and team documented the House of the Dying under its guidance by Agnes Gange Boyaciu, also known as Sister Mary Teresa, or Mother Teresa. Teresa ran the convent called Missionaries of Charity, who in turn ran the House for the Dying, a building where the dying poor could come to pass away instead of on the streets. Though claiming no prior motivations, upon filming, Muggeridge instantly became attracted to fashioning Teresa into a public figure. Something Beautiful for God gave the world its very first images of Teresa, one in glowing, propagandist light. And it is light itself to which the documentary claimed its miracle.
And Peter Schaefer, the director, said, it's very dark in here, do you think we can get anything? And we had just taken delivery at the BBC of some new film made by Kodak, which we hadn't had time to test before we left, so I said to Peter, well, let's have a go. So we shot it. And when we got back, several weeks later, a month or two later, we're sitting in the Rushes Theatre at Ealing Studios, and eventually up came the shots of the House of the Dying. And it was surprising. You could see every detail. And I said, that's amazing, that's extraordinary. And I was going to go on to say, 3 cheers for Kodak. I didn't get a chance to say that though, because Malcolm, sitting in the front row, spun round and said, it's divine light. It's Mother Teresa. You'll find that it's divine light, old boy. And 3 or 4 days later, I found I was being phoned by journalists from London newspapers who were saying things like, we hear you've just come back from India with Malcolm Muggeridge, and you were the witness of a miracle.
Macmillan's own testimony of the footage came too late. Teresa and Muggeridge began appearing in the press, promotionally. Soon, a new international figure arose in the public mind. Donations poured into Teresa's organization, a figure once described as around $50 million annually. Few contributors would know, until after her death, that less than half of all contributions actually went to the poor.
Mother Teresa built over 100 facilities around the world, all bearing her name and that of her organization, Missionaries of Charity.
Even misappropriated as the funds were, Mother Teresa was quick to take money from any source, no matter how dubious, including banker Charles Keating, known for defrauding Americans out of over $3 billion throughout the 80s and 90s, including losing the life savings of over 21,000 senior citizens.
Keating, now in prison in California for his conviction on security fraud charges.
At his peak, Keating donated over $1.2 million personally to Teresa and lent her his private jet for personal use. Mother Teresa even served as a character witness during Charles Keating's trial, writing a letter to the judge, Lance Ito, that Charles Keating had always been kind and generous to God's poor and was ready to help whenever he needed. She then invoked the Bible, "As long as you did it to one of these, my least brethren, you did it to me." After Keating was found guilty, Teresa was pressed to return the funds given to her by him. She refused comment. Teresa additionally took in millions from Haitian dictator Jean-Claude Baby Doc Duvalier, who visited human rights horrors upon his people and stole money from the Haitian poor to furnish his own lavish lifestyle.
Duvalier took control of Haiti after his father, Francois Papadoc Duvalier, died in 1971. Both father and son ruled through violence, torturing and killing thousands of political opponents.
While visiting Baby Doc Duvalier, Mother Teresa posed with his wife, Michelle, and said of the experience, "Madam President is someone who feels, who knows, who wishes to demonstrate her love not only with her words, but also with concrete and tangible actions. Madam President, the whole country vibrates with your life work." But why didn't Mother Teresa use the funds she received as she promoted? Why didn't she establish hospitals? What actually happened inside the House of the Dying? The Lancet Medical Journal editor, Robin Fox, visited the House for the Dying in 1991. Fox found nurses with no medical training. The dying men and women were sorted into two separate mass rooms.
Mother Teresa's money is mostly spent on religious activities and not on the poor.
There are no chairs anywhere. There are just these stretcher beds that have enough drips. The needles they used and reused over and over and over, and you would see some of the nuns rinsing needles under the cold water tap.
Many reports indicate that the dying were baptized without their knowledge or consent. Why these measures? Because for Mother Teresa, people had to suffer to know Christ. And to her own admission, people had to suffer for her to know Christ. In the words of Christopher Hitchens, Mother Teresa was not a friend to those who suffered. She was a friend of suffering. She was not a friend of the poor, she was a friend of being poor, and stated openly that people had to be poor and suffer to know Jesus. After her death, letters came forth of confessions Teresa had made over the course of 3 decades, when she not only questioned her faith, but her own righteousness. People suffered for an imposed faith, one she did not believe. Teresa was the leader of a cult of suffering. Suffering for her was proselytizing, and proselytizing was the ultimate goal. To that end, Agnes Boiaciu could have used her hundreds of millions of dollars in contributions to alleviate the pain and suffering of millions, to open hospitals, or at the very least to provide the institutions she did control, like the House for the Dying, with better supplies, with better staff. Instead, due to her status as a public figure, a representative of the church, and a living saint, she chose not to. Consider if you had the resources, and you could change the life of just one terminally ill person. Consider a dying elderly man, and knowing that with your aid, you'd allow him access to pain relief medication, a sterile room, a warm bed, and world-class medical care, with an opportunity to be surrounded by any who loved him. Or would you choose option 2, and condemn him to waste away in a crowded room, without basic medicines for pain management or disease control, to be stuck with unclean needles, and denied visitation from loved ones? Is one of these options right? Is one wrong? If the right one is correct, is it the moral thing to do? And if it is the other immoral? Or should this be considered on a different day? After all, it's time to have your picture taken.
Well, you called Mother Teresa a fanatical...
A fundamentalist, a fanatic, and a fraud.
A fanatical Albanian dwarf.
Lying, thieving Albanian.
Lying, thieving Albanian dwarf.